Daf Yomi, Tractate Bava, page 4b, Daf 4b. Here, too, teach the Mishnah. And with regard to man, responsibility for safeguarding his body is incumbent upon him. Rav Mari objects to the Gemara's initial suggestion that the dispute between Rav and Shmuel with regard to the meaning of maveh is based on biblical terms with similar etymology. He suggests, but why not say that maveh, this is the primary category of damage caused by water, as it is written, as when fire ignites brushwood, fire boils water. Isaiah 64:1. The term tiveh and maveh share a common root, and the reference is to water. The Gemara rejects this. It is written in the verse, water boils, nivu, from fire, with water, a plural noun in Hebrew, the subject of the intransitive plural verb nivu, no, fire boils, tiveh, water is written. And since tiveh is a transitive singular verb, the subject is fire, which is a singular noun. Therefore, no proof can be adduced from this verse that maveh refers to an action performed with water. Rav Zvid objects to the Gemara's initial suggestion that the dispute between Rav and Shmuel with regard to the meaning of maveh is based on biblical terms with similar etymology. He suggests, but why not say that maveh is the primary category of fire? As when the term tiveh is written in the verse cited by Rav Mari, it is written with regard to fire. The Gemara rejects this. If so, what is the meaning of the Mishnah enumerates the primary categories of damage, the category of maveh and the category of hever? Maveh and hever would both be fire, indicating that they are two distinct categories. And if you would say that these are not two distinct categories, but rather the Mishnah is explaining the meaning of maveh, if so, why does the Mishnah say there are four primary categories of damage? There are only three. And if you would say that maveh is fire, and there are four categories in the Mishnah, as the Mishnah teaches, the primary category of ox, in which there are two primary categories of damage, eating and trampling, the Mishnah remains difficult. If it is so that maveh in the Mishnah is referring to fire, what is the meaning of that which the Mishnah states with regard to the common denominator of maveh and ox, and the defining characteristics of this category of ox and the category of maveh, in which there is a living spirit, and not similar to the defining characteristics of this category, ox, and that category of maveh in which there is a living spirit, and not similar to the defining characteristic of the next category in the Mishnah, in which there is no living spirit. Accordingly, how can maveh mean fire? What living spirit is there in fire? And furthermore, if maveh is fire, what is the meaning of the next phrase in the Mishnah? They are not similar to the defining characteristic of the category of fire, in which there is no living spirit. Clearly, maveh is fire. Contrary to the Mishnah, where four primary categories of damage were enumerated, Rabbi Oshia taught in Tosefta 9:1 that there are 13 primary categories of damage. The 13 categories consist of 4 baileys, 5 types of indemnity, and the 4 primary categories listed in the Mishnah. The 4 baileys are the unpaid bailey, who is liable for damage caused by his negligence, or like a shomer chinam, like someone who watches something. Unpaid bailey, who watches something. Shomer. Bailey. Bailey is a shomer. And the borrower is liable for all damage, the paid bailee and the renter, who is liable if the object is lost or stolen. The 5 types of indemnity is one liable to pay for injuring another person are damage, in other words, the decrease of the injured party's value, pain, and medical costs, cost of livelihood, and humiliation that the injured party suffered from as the result, and with the 4 primary categories enumerated in the Mishnah, that is a total of 13. The Gemara asks, and what is the reason the Tana of our Mishnah does not teach these 9 categories and enumerates only 4? Granted, according to the opinion of Shmuel, who says that Mava is eating, it is with regard to the categories of damage caused by one's property that the Tana of the Mishnah speaks. With regard to categories of damage caused by one's body, the Tana of the Mishnah does not speak, and the additional categories of Rabbi Oshia are damage caused by one's body. But according to the opinion of Rav, who says that Mava is man, let the Tana of the Mishnah teach that these 9 categories as well. Let the Tana of the Mishnah teach these 9 categories as well. The Gemara answers, according to Rav, the Mishnah teaches the primary category of man, and included in that category are all manners of damage that are caused by man, among them the categories added by Rabbi Oshia. The Gemara asks, and according to Rabbi Oshia, too, doesn't the Mishnah teach the primary category of man? Why then did he enumerate the 4 bailees and the 5 types of indemnity? The Gemara answers, in his enumeration, Rabbi Oshia distinguishes between 2 types of damage caused by man. He teaches cases involving a man who injures another person, and he teaches the primary category of Maveh, which involves the cases of a man who damages an ox or damages other property belonging to another person. The Gemara asks, if so, with regard to ox as well, let him teach 2 categories of ox. Let him teach the case of an ox that damages an ox or other property belonging to another person. Let him teach the case of an ox that injures a person. The Gemara rejects this suggestion. What is this comparison? Granted, in the case of a man who damages another's ox or another property, he merely pays for the damage. In the case of a man who injures another person, he pays an additional 4 types of indemnity payments: pain, medical costs, loss of livelihood, and humiliation. But with regard to damage caused by an ox, what difference is there to me if it is an ox that damages an ox or other property belonging to another person, and what difference is there to me if it is an ox that injures a person? In both this case and that case, the owner of the ox pays merely for the damage. Therefore, unlike a case where a person causes the damage, there is no reason to distinguish between cases where an ox causes damage based on the victim of that damage. With regard to the assertion that Rabbi Oshia added only cases involving a man who injures another person, the Gemara asks, but aren't there the categories of the unpaid bailee and the borrower? The paid bailee and the renter, which are categories that describe a man who damages another's ox or another property, and the cases referred to by Rabbi Oshia are those where the bailee fails to return the deposit that he was entrusted to safeguard. And yet Rabbi Oshia teaches each type of bailee as distinct categories and does not include them under the rubric of man, one of the 4 categories enumerated in the Mishnah. The Gemara answers that the reason why Rabbi Oshia enumerates man separately from the bailees is that he teaches one category, man, referring to damage that is engendered by direct action. An example is 5 types of indemnity payments, which he teaches, and he teaches the 4 bailees referring to damage that occurs on its own. For example, failure of the 4 bailees to safeguard the deposit. The Gemara cites a 3rd listing of primary categories of damage. Rabbi Chia teaches that There are 24 primary categories of damage. Payment of double the principal, paid by a thief who is apprehended and convicted based on the testimony of witnesses and who does not admit his crime, and payment of 4 or 5 times the principal, paid by a thief who steals an ox or sheep, respectively, and then slaughters or sells it, and payment of the principal by a thief who admits his crime, and a robber who steals openly, and by force or threat of violence, and conspiring witnesses who pay the individual against whom they falsely testified with regard to a sum that they conspired to cause him to lose. And the rapist and the seducer who seduces an unmarried young woman, who pay a fine of 50 selah, and the defamer, one who defames his wife by claiming falsely in a court that he discovered that she was not a virgin when he consummated the marriage, and alleges that she engaged in intercourse with another man while betrothed, who pays a fine of 100 selah, and one who causes another's truma to become ritually impure, rendering it prohibited to partake of that truma, and one who mixes truma with another's non-sacred food, rendering it prohibited for any non-priest to partake of it, and one who pours another's wine as a libation for idolatry. When one combines the 11 categories enumerated by Rabbi Chia and these 13 categories enumerated by Rabbi Oshia, this totals 24 principal categories of damage. The Gemara asks, and for Rabbi Oshia, what is the reason that he did not teach these 11 additional categories? The Gemara answers, it is with regard to cases where one is liable to pay monetary restitution that Rabbi Oshia speaks. With regard to cases where one is liable to pay a fine, Rabbi Oshia does not speak. The Gemara asks, what of the cases of a thief and a robber, which are cases where one is liable to pay monetary restitution? Let Rabbi Oshia teach those categories and include them in his list. The Gemara answers, doesn't he teach those cases, as enumerates in his list the unpaid bailee and the borrower? An unpaid bailee who takes a false oath that the deposit was stolen, when in fact it remained in his possession, is liable to pay restitution, like a thief. The Gemara asks, and as for Rabbi Chia too, doesn't he teach those cases, as he enumerates in his list the unpaid bailee and the borrower? Why does Rabbi Chia list them separately? The Gemara answers, Rabbi Chia makes a distinction between different types of theft. He teaches cases of theft with regard to property that came into one's possession in a permitted manner. For example, an unpaid bailee who was entrusted with a deposit and later misappropriated it, and he teaches cases of theft with regard to property that came into one's possession in a prohibited manner. For example, the actions of a thief and a robber.